Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, where we're talking about Ferguson, Missouri, which, as we all know, has been on the national and international spotlight. We are now joined with, of course, with our Dr. Bart Rossi. We also have Dr. Bill Rosenberg from Drexel University, and we thank you so much for joining us. We were talking about, of course, the Michael Brown case, and obviously we've been watching these riots for the last 2 weeks, and just your thoughts, gentlemen, on why Ferguson became such a spotlight. There have been other cases like this in recent years. Why has Ferguson become thrust into the national and international spotlight?
Well, if I could start, I think it's the psychology of different police departments. I think, as we said last week on this show, there are many police departments in this country that do a great job. However, some have a personality that's quite negative, and I think this one is a problem.
Do you think that that's pushing the button and saying guilty until you should be innocent until proven guilty?
Well, I think in this case we have to see what happens with the officer.
Right,
but for the department itself, it has a history, just like Sanford had a history of problems, racial issues, targeting people. And I'm very familiar with police and police work. I've evaluated thousands of officers. I know that certain types of departments are not as good at community policing as others. And this department seems to have a multitude of problems.
Dr. Rosenberg, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this whole situation is really fascinating because it really raises the issue about legitimacy, not just legitimacy of the police department, but for governments and authority. Because what happens is there became a challenge. There was an incident that happened. Immediately, people started using the words murder rather than killing. There was
I completely agree
a whole
with you.
bunch of different words were being substituted in and out. There was the whole issue about the percentage of the population that's black and the percentage of the police force. But ultimately, the police have to be respected, but the police also have to earn that respect. They have to have legitimacy. And as a result of having legitimacy, then people follow them, and then their authority is able to be unfolded. What happened was, in this situation, their authority was so undercut that the governor had to bring in the
National Guard.
Well, they also had to bring in African American Mr. Brown to settle it down, and that was a very effective tactic. So ultimately, it has to do with who is perceived as legitimate.
Another question for the panelists here: how much of a role do you think poverty plays in a case like this? Dee Dee?
It plays a big role because, look, you've got your Detroits of the world. And look at all the crime. Whenever you've got poverty and people aren't making money and they're selling drugs and all these terrible things happen, white, black, or green, it doesn't matter. There will be more crime.
Well, I think the other thing that's important is that this has become a microcosm for not just race, but also societal ills all across the country. And in some ways, it's a little bit of an unfair burden for this police officer to have to be referred to in the same breath as Trayvon Martin and many other cases. This is an incident in which he is being potentially charged, and he has to be judged on his own merits.
He's prosecuted before we've even gotten started. I think it's unfair to the officer.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the officer, but I also want to mention to our viewers who are watching, just very close to our studios where we film in Staten Island, New York, there are thousands of people protesting right now. They've had to shut down all the stores today. And we're hoping that it's going to be a very peaceful protest because not only are New York police on alert, but so are New Jersey, and they've got the family of Michael Brown, the former mayor of New York City. So
this is also getting played all around the world. All the totalitarian states are putting on their news broadcasts in Russia and Iraq and China. All these states are talking about the United States and how unfair we are. Ultimately, though, our system of justice is going to play out. Hopefully it's going to play out fairly and there's going to be a judgment made.
But I completely agree with you because I check out the Italian newspapers each week, and my friend was over in Budapest and texted me and said, can you believe what's happening? And you have to remind everybody that this is a city of 21,000 people.
Right.
So,
yeah, and we don't hear enough good things about what some of the departments are doing that's very positive. And I mentioned on the show last week that in Richmond, they're making great strides in dealing with gang violence and other types of violence and racial issues.
Oh, there's Richmond. I mean, I can name police departments I've worked with all over the country as well.
The New York Police Department, the best. They're great.
Very good.
Very nice.
Absolutely.
They do a wonderful job
and
what they have to deal with.
Well, I do want to go to a Pew Research poll. And this is the latest poll. Black and white Americans sharply divided over this case. 80% of African Americans say that the shooting raises serious questions about race, as opposed to 37% of whites.
Yeah, it goes back to the story that's been playing out for 50 years. There's two Americas, a white American and a black American. They view the society in many ways differently. It's not a great surprise. If you go back to the O.J. Simpson trial, a couple of decades ago, it was the same thing. Blacks thought he was innocent, and whites thought he was guilty.
And so Trayvon Martin.
And that frame just keeps playing out. And just in response to Dee Dee, we talk about the New York Police Department, but they also had stop and frisk, and there was also a lot of difference in opinion.
A lot of us think that was a good thing.
Yeah,
I do want to also
didn't.
mention, though, as you said, Dr. Rosenberg, about the police officer, he shouldn't be tried just yet. There are right now, people are going on and raising money on Facebook and different things. They've raised something like $235,000 because his life is forever changed. We don't know what happened. We weren't there, and it's just a reminder of all of us not to.
And we should know what was in his mind. What was he thinking about? And he deserves to be shown in that regard.
Innocent until proven guilty.
What was he thinking about, and what happened to him? That's true.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to turn our attention now to James Foley, who disappeared on November 22nd, 2012 in northwest Syria. He was not heard from again until this week's chilling video, which was released by ISIS. Now, we want to remind everyone that the past 2 years have been the deadliest for journalists worldwide. Foley is one of at least 20 reporters who have gone missing in Syria since its civil war began, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Now, his family released a statement saying, "We couldn't be more proud of James." Now, as a journalist who has worked in difficult areas all over the world, we are saddened by the news this week of the loss of one of our own who paid the ultimate price. And one of the things that we do want to say is a lot of the journalists who are out there now are in these very difficult areas, whether it's Ukraine, out in the Middle East, wherever, they've become targets.
Oh, yeah. And I think as a psychologist, if I had to diagnose this group, I'd say that they were psychotic and they wanted to kill everybody. So I think we have to take a look at the fear that they're trying to project, and we have to try to deal with that.
This is a question for the panel now, okay? Now, I was saying at the commercial break that I know several people who spent time on the internet to go watch this horrific video of a person losing their life. We'll talk about what that says about society, Dr. Bart, but isn't that playing into ISIS's hands and spreading this fear?
The violence is part of their tactic. It's kind of like, and not to make it this too strong of a statement, but that's why Tiger Woods used to win all the time. He had everyone psyched out before they walked on the golf course. And I think the reality is that ISIS, because they're so brutal and they're willing to do anything in the most heinous way, has convinced their adversaries that they better not fight and they better throw down their arms and they better run away.
But there's been brutality throughout history. I mean, but I'm saying that they put this on a YouTube video.
That is part of their tactic. That's their propaganda machine.
But shouldn't people? I mean, these are young Americans who went on to watch.
You're not going to get people convinced not to watch.
I mean, and I admit it, I watched. I know it's terrible, but I wanted to see what happened. And many other Americans, I don't think it's the Americans' fault. I think it's terrible it's there. But if it's there, people are going to look at it.
Curiosity, but to go to the point that the doctors make.
I disagree. To see somebody lose, I'm sorry, I'm going to disagree with you.
That's okay. That's all right.
I think some people there's a side to them that want to see this. It's the curiosity, it's the nature of.
I didn't want to see it. I just felt obligated to watch.
I do agree with you. I'd rather people not watch it. I think that would be the better way to go. But I just wanted to comment on the point about fear, because fear works two ways. Sometimes it works against people. And in this case, I think in terms of what they did, what ISIS did, I think the backlash against them is going to be very severe. And I think the president highlighted that.
Well, we've seen Obama certainly change his tune a little bit on this one. What do you think is going to be done? Some people are saying there may be some airstrikes in Syria.
Well, perhaps. The family said a lot more could have been done. His life should have been saved. Basically saying Obama didn't do what he should have done. It's like leave him in the Marine down in Mexico. He's just not taking care of business.
The issue, though, ultimately is if you start to reward terrorists with paying funds, what you're doing is you're enriching them with money to be able to continue their actions, and you're also encouraging them to think that this is a wise move. This is what happened in Central America for a long time, that business executives used to be kidnapped and they would be held for ransom. So it's a very difficult thing. I don't think it's a partisan thing. I think that Democrats and Republicans both have perspectives about whether it's a good idea to try and bring them home or not. The problem with a group like ISIS, and what's troubled a lot of leaders, is that they're not necessarily a reliable partner. They say, convert to Islam or you're dead.
Yeah, that's an understatement, for sure.
The guy converts and then they chop his head off anyway. So how do you have a negotiation with someone like that?
Well, you can't, but I think to the question, I think what the president said in his words, if you read it, if you look at it carefully, is that we should eliminate these people. And I think that's what his plan is going to be.
Well, we're going to certainly be watching this very closely in the coming weeks. Again, there's at least 20 more journalists that are over there right now that have been there for the last 2 years, and certainly our thoughts are always with them. We do have some good news to report right now. Dr. Kent Brantley, the American doctor who had been working on the front lines fighting Ebola, well, he's recovered. I'm sure you probably saw his press conference, his emotional plea to remember all those who are suffering in West Africa. And it was such a moving speech to hear him.
Yeah, it's amazing. Ebola, I mean, because, we think it's immediately a death sentence. For this guy to survive, I mean, that really is very good.
Well,
news.
I mean, of course, obviously he had Western care also, but it was very emotional to see him. I mean, I almost teared up just listening to him.
Inspirational, because you really get a sense that when we all pull together, we can kind of conquer even a disease like this or an infection like this.
The reality, though, is it sounds like there was also special treatment that was made available to him that's not in a dose large enough to really help that many people. There's the whole issue about the protective gear and how readily available that is. So there's much that has to be done, but it was certainly a wonderful sight to see him and also the woman who was over there treating to both be released. But the question is, how do you prevent this? How do you prevent it from spreading? And how does warfare in these areas play a role? Because
and the
you couldn't
downside
go
is
in to help people.
He survives it. It's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's a big deal.
Right.
Well, they've got areas now where they've quarantined, people off and things like that. So hopefully they can contain this deadly disease.
You also have countries that are so unstable that to get the cooperation of those countries to participate is going to be really hard as well.
But I like the success of this story, though. I do. I think it shows that we can conquer something.
We've just had.
I'm still scared to death of it. I think it's a scary deal, really.
Well, obviously this is going to be a story that we're going to be watching as well, and hoping that it doesn't spread and they can contain it in the next coming weeks. But at least it was somewhat of a happy note, because the news has been pretty darn grim lately. We keep coming on this show and saying, sorry, we have to report this as well and talk about it, but that is what we've been doing. So we leave you on this second segment with a little bit of good news. We still have much more to come here on Fresh Outlook, including a discussion on Texas Governor Rick Perry. Now, he was indicted a week ago for abusing his power, but will mugshot be an asset or a liability if he decides to run for president? We'll ask our panel of experts that question when we return.